You ever think about how your brain tells your big toe to wiggle? I mean, it feels totally instant, right? But behind that simple little action is one of the most amazing, most mind-boggling logistics systems in the entire universe. And it's all happening inside a single cell. So let's dive right in and see how it works.
Okay, so here's the core problem we're dealing with. A single nerve cell, a neuron, can be incredibly long. I'm talking it can stretch from your lower spine all the way down to your foot. That's, well, on a cellular scale, that is a massive distance. So the big question is, how on earth does the cell's command center, back in your spine, keep its tiny little outpost in your foot supplied with everything it needs to survive?
Well, you might think, can't stuff just float down there? That's a process called diffusion. And if a neuron relied on that, just molecules passively drifting down that super long corridor, it would be an absolute disaster. It's just way, way too slow over these kinds of distances. And I'm not talking slow like it would take a few hours or a few days. We are talking literally years. I mean, just look at this comparison. The difference in speed is absolutely staggering. The body's solution, this fast active transport system, can get a package from your spine to your foot in about 2.5 days. Pretty quick, right? But if that same package had to rely on just floating there, on diffusion, we're looking at almost 3 years. 3! The cell would be long dead, obviously. So, what's its secret? How does it pull off this incredible feat? The secret is, it builds its own internal, high-speed transit system. Think of it like a cellular superhighway that runs the entire length of that nerve fiber, also known as the axon. Okay, so the official scientific name for this whole system is axonal transport. And what it is the active process, and that word active is key, of moving all the vital materials a neuron needs. We're talking proteins, entire organelles like the cell's power plants, all of it, being moved up and down the axon using the neuron's own internal skeleton. And just like any good highway system, this one has 3 main parts. First, you've got the tracks. These are long protein filaments called microtubules. Then you need the engines, or maybe think of them as the trucks. These are amazing little motor proteins that literally walk along the tracks carrying cargo. And of course, you need fuel. The fuel that powers these little engines is ATP, which is basically the energy currency for all of our cells. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit and meet the delivery trucks. These are the motor proteins that are actually driving all the traffic and, doing all the heavy lifting. So it turns out there are 2 main kinds of delivery trucks on this highway. And here's the cool part. They travel in opposite directions. You've got kinesin. Think of kinesin as the outbound truck. It moves away from the cell body, carrying all the fresh supplies, things like neurotransmitters and vesicles. Then you have dynein. Dynein is the inbound truck, moving toward the cell body. It's carrying stuff like waste for recycling, important signals, and, as we're about to see, sometimes it picks up some pretty nasty, unwanted cargo. This 2-way traffic system is, you guessed it, absolutely critical for the cell's survival. Now, scientists have fancy names for these 2 directions. The outbound traffic is called anterograde transport, and the inbound traffic is called retrograde transport. Let's start by looking at those outbound lanes. Okay, so first up is that outbound traffic, anterograde transport. This is all about shipping freshly made materials from the cell's headquarters out to the front lines, all the way to the nerve terminal where all the action happens. And what's in the boxes? Oh, just the most vital stuff you can imagine. We're talking neurotransmitters, the chemicals needed to send signals. The little bubbles or vesicles that carry them, mitochondria for energy, the list goes on. And this is the express lane, okay? These kinesin motors are just zipping along at speeds up to 400 millimeters a day. That's incredibly fast for a tiny little protein. All right, so what about the return trip? What's coming back the other way? Well, that's retrograde transport. And you should know this is way more than just a garbage run. It's a super important communication and recycling pathway leading back to the cell's command center. So on these inbound trucks, which are driven by dynein, you'll find all sorts of things. You've got worn out old parts being sent back to get recycled. You've got these really important signals called growth factors that are basically telling the cell body, hey, everything's okay out here. But this is also the exact same route that gets hijacked by those unwanted guests we mentioned, things like toxins and viruses. And even though it's a bit slower than the outbound route, it's still moving at a pretty good clip, somewhere between 100 and 300 millimeters per day. So as you can probably imagine, this entire system has to work perfectly. Because when this cellular highway gets a traffic jam, or a bridge collapses, or it gets hijacked, the consequences for our health can be, well, they can be absolutely devastating. So what happens? What happens when this perfectly organized, beautifully elegant highway gets hijacked or just falls apart? It's a huge question for researchers, and unfortunately, the answers are linked to some of the worst diseases imaginable. Basically, the problems fall into two big categories. First, you've got the hijackers. These are outside invaders, like the viruses that cause rabies and herpes, or the toxin that causes tetanus. They are smart. They literally hop on that inbound dine-in truck and ride the highway all the way into our central nervous system. Then you have system failure. This is when the machinery itself, the tracks or the trucks, just breaks down. This kind of internal collapse is a huge part of what goes wrong in terrible neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and ALS. Okay, I know that was a lot to take in, so let's do a quick recap of the most important points about this amazing biological delivery service. All right, here's your 30-second summary. First, neurons use axonal transport to solve the massive problem of distance. Simple diffusion is just too slow. Second, this system is basically a superhighway made of microtubule tracks with motor proteins for trucks, all powered by ATP fuel. Third, remember kinesin, that's your outbound or anterograde traffic. And fourth, dining handles the inbound or retrograde traffic. And finally, and this is the big one, when this system breaks, it's linked to major diseases, from viral infections to Alzheimer's. And all of this leaves us with a really powerful and kind of hopeful final thought. We know this internal highway is right at the center of so many terrible diseases. So what if we could learn how to fix it? What if scientists could figure out how to repair the broken tracks, or fix the little engines, or clear up the traffic jams on this cellular superhighway? Could we one day be on a path to not just treating diseases like Alzheimer's, but maybe even reversing them? It's a huge question, and it's exactly what drives the world of neuroscience forward every single day.